Is that one on?
Yep.
Okay. Cool. What's up, everyone? Alan Johnson with the AJ team here with a very special guest. One of our referral partners, Brian Smalls, from Cornerstone Estate Planning.
That's right.
Awesome. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
And
Pleasure to be here.
Today we're going to talk about an important question. So we deal with a lot of people who deal with probates and inherited homes. So we figured instead of just having you guys out there and not getting the information, we wanted to bring an expert in the industry. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your business, how you got into this business? Tell us a little bit about your football background, maybe.
Sure,
all that good stuff.
Sure. Yeah. So Cornerstone Estate Planners has been around since 2012.
Okay.
We practice primarily in Tidewater, but we also are throughout Northern Virginia, out in the western part of the state of Virginia as well. So throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. But we focus primarily on estate planning. Mm-hmm. We also focus on estate administration, so probate.
Okay.
So those are two areas that we focus on primarily. My background is I grew up in Tidewater, went to school at the University of Michigan, played football there for a while.
Okay.
And then once I graduated, went to University of Miami for law school. And then my wife is from Williamsburg, Virginia, and she said she wanted to move back home, and that's where I'm from as well. So she won, and so we ended up back here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So we are our focus is on probate, mm-hmm. And so that's my passion, being able to help families, when they're in their time of need, and being able to help prepare for generations moving forward. So that's the estate planning piece. So the Bible says that a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, Proverbs 13:22. So that's what I'm passionate about. I want to be able to help people to establish a foundation for now, to establish legacy for years to come.
Okay, awesome. So let's dumb this down, because I'm a country boy.
All right.
Right. And I didn't go to law school.
Okay.
So what does probate mean?
Okay. So probate is the process in which, when an individual passes away, you have to go through the courts to have the will validated, if an individual has a will.
Okay.
Now, if they don't have a will and they have assets, it's still a situation where more likely than not, their assets are going to have to be distributed to, whether it be family members, more often than not, sometimes friends, if they're leaving stuff in the will to friends. But basically, it is the process of basically wrapping up an individual's affairs.
Got it. Okay, and I heard you say estate as well.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about what that means. What does the word estate mean?
Yeah, so essentially your estate is whatever assets you own at the time you pass away. Okay. And that those things belong to you in your individual capacity. They're not jointly owned. Okay. Because if it's jointly owned, more often than not, it would go to whoever the other person is, if they're assuming that they're still alive.
Okay.
So essentially, your estate is whatever you own in your name personally at the time that you pass away.
Okay, awesome. So let's start from the beginning, right? So we're going to get to the probates, right?
Okay.
So say someone like me, right? And we own a business and we own properties. Tell me some basics when it comes down to estate planning. When someone sits down with you, what are some key questions you're asking? Like, how do we kind of wrap our heads around planning for the future?
Sure. So the biggest thing is really just trying to figure out kind of what their goals are. Sometimes, when people come in, more often than not, they have a story to tell.
Okay.
They've had a family member who has gone through, the probate process. And they don't want to necessarily go through the probate process. So sometimes they'll sit down and say, hey, if I can avoid having my family and friends go through the probate process, then, a lot of times that's a pain point. And so that's kind of where we start a lot of times. So we try to figure out what are some goals, what are some strategies that we can utilize to maybe minimize the amount of time that they spend in probate, or if we can avoid probate altogether, then that's what we do.
Gotcha.
Okay.
So the object is, when you're going through estate planning, is not to go through the probate process. You've already planned ahead, so things are already like, if this is going to this person, this is going to the next person. You've already planned that stuff out.
Yeah. So the reality is this: as much as we can avoid, especially when it comes to our assets, having them pass outside of the probate process, then that's what we want to do. There's costs associated with the probate process, and those costs go up the more that's a part of your actual estate. Okay, so basically they tally up all of your assets, whatever the total is, and basically they take a cut basically.
Right.
And when I say they, I'm talking about your local jurisdiction. When you go through the circuit court, whether it be in Prince William County or James City County or City of Richmond, there's a fee that's associated with the probate process. Okay. And again, that's dependent on the value of your total estate. But if you're able to take assets and pass them outside of your estate, maybe it's life insurance and there's a beneficiary, so now you've got an asset that's passing on to a loved one that doesn't have to go through probate. Or maybe you have a house that's a part of a trust. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a few moments. But if you've got an asset that's passing outside of probate, that's not considered as a part of of your estate.
Okay, cool. So I heard you talk about the probate process, and it can be long. Yes. So suppose someone does not sit down with you, like everyone should be sitting down with Brian, going through. All right, so basically, if you own a property, if you have any assets, if you have anything that's important that you guys want to pass on to your loved ones, you should be sitting down with someone like Brian, making sure that you're talking about these things. And a lot of these conversations can happen virtually. Oftentimes when I'm sitting down, we don't have to be face to face to talk and to plan, because the rules of Virginia are the rules of Virginia, right? So he can be where he lives and still create a good plan for you guys, and making sure that the assets that you work so hard for, right, get to the people that you want them to get to, the people that you love the most. So the probate process,
yes,
like if it goes sideways, right?
Yeah.
Which it goes sideways often, right? How sideways can this thing go if they're not sitting down and planning ahead of time?
Sure. So it can go sideways, and it goes sideways very quickly.
Okay.
You could have family members who are at odds, people estranged for many years, and then they pop back up into the picture when they're having to go through the probate process. Because everybody who is in heir has to be notified that this process is going on. Okay, so people can come into the picture and they can stir up the pot, if you will. Right. But the probate process can last for years. I've had experiences where you have family members, like maybe someone gets married and it's a second marriage, and maybe they're children from the first marriage, and you have a probate process that ends up lasting for 8-10 years because they're at odds. Right. And so the courts have to be involved, and oftentimes there's litigation, and sometimes there's allegation that somebody that's serving as a fiduciary, or like maybe the executor of the estate or a trustee, is not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So whenever you've got folks and they're butting heads, it can prolong that probate period for quite some time.
And I'm assuming it gets more expensive the less organized you are.
Absolutely. So a lot of times when people say estate planning can cost a lot of money. Estate planning, the way you have to look at it, is an investment. Okay. If you are dealing with an estate planner, or estate planning attorney, there's going to be an investment into the future of your family.
Correct.
Okay. And so you're better off making an investment up front, as opposed to having this thing drag out for years and years, and you end up having a situation where now the costs are through the roof, and they're uncontrolled because you don't have any say so as to kind of the cost associated once you start to go through that process.
Got it. So 2 follow-up questions on that, and I promise we got so much to get to, but a couple questions I have. Number one, say someone's already has a will, right? Or they already have it. How often should they be coming to you to review that will, right? And making sure that everything, because things change, right? Assets change. Suppose they had a will written 5, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. Is it smart to be coming back to make sure someone's reviewing it? Sure. And then number 2, like, what should people be thinking about as far as how much it's going to cost to have someone like you sit down and make sure that all these things are planned out?
Sure. So I think one of the biggest things is, if you've already got a will in place, or maybe you've done a trust, you've done some estate planning, it's smart to have it reviewed. We like to actually do annual checkups, almost like going to the doctor. Because things change, and things change very quickly. You may acquire new assets, or you may sell property, And so those things, if they're part of the estate plan, then that needs to be taken into consideration.
Okay.
Or maybe there's a life-changing event like someone gets married or someone gets divorced. It happens all the time, and unfortunately, the last thing you want to have happen in a divorce situation is to get divorced, not change the estate plan, and now you've got somebody inheriting property that you definitely don't want to, get the property that you worked hard for.
Right.
So that is something to take into consideration, is to consider doing it on an annual basis. Now, it doesn't have to be every single year if there haven't been any changes, but typically the way we do things, if there haven't been any changes, we can sit down, we can have a conversation, and if there doesn't need to be changes made to the documents, then there's no cost associated with it. Okay. But if we have to go in and do some maintenance to the documents to change things, it just depends on how extensive that is.
I got it.
But in general, when we're talking about estate planning, we can take an a la carte approach to estate planning. Maybe at this time, somebody just wants to get a will done. Okay. And if that's the case, then we can do that. And maybe you're talking anywhere from, maybe $400 to $700 to get a will done, just depending on the complexity of it.
The more complex, the more expensive.
Exactly.
Got it.
But now if it's a situation where we're talking about, okay, we need to be a little bit more comprehensive with the estate plan, because not only do we want to take into consideration the assets that we have, we also want to take into consideration, hey, what if I become incapacitated and, someone needs to be able to make financial decisions on my behalf?
Right.
What if they need to be in a position to be able to make medical decisions on behalf? In a comprehensive estate plan situation, now what we're looking at being in a position to where we can take a total picture and look at assets, but then also look at all the other things that kind of go into an estate plan.
Got it. All right. So, hope you guys got a lot out of it. I got a lot out of it. I'm sending my will to you because I need that comprehensive plan.
Absolutely.
I'm not perfect either.
Sure.
All right. Suppose someone gets an inherited home, right?
Sure.
Can they sell it?
So, the answer to that is like a lot of answers when it comes to law. It depends. Okay. If you inherit a property and you're the sole heir, that means that you're the only person that is going to be inheriting this property. Okay. More than likely, you're going to be able to sell the property. Okay. But it depends on how the property is inherited and maybe the rules or the provisions that get put in place in the estate planning documents. If someone inherits a home and it's inherited through a will, okay, depending on what that will says, that it can dictate whether they're in a position to be able to sell that particular property or not. Okay. The other thing is to take into consideration if there are multiple people who are inheriting that property. Okay. Then you have to take into consideration, hey, I've got family members, and then they're going to have a say-so in, as to what actually happens with the home. So it just, again, it kind of depends on each particular situation.
Okay, so suppose someone has a loved one that passes away,
Sure.
right? And a home is attached to, or a home, they own a home, and the person thinks that home is coming to them.
Sure.
Should they be calling you? Like, in what type of conversation should they have? Like, what action steps do you kind of go through after, they find out and they initiate conversations with you?
Sure. So if I get a call that, hey, someone has passed away, the expectation is that they're going to inherit a piece of property, going to inherit a house.
Right.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to advise them that, first of all, if there are any documents associated with the home, like the deeds or whatnot, put your hands on those things. Okay. That's one thing. The other thing that I'm going to recommend they do is figure out what is the utility situation. Okay. If there's electricity that's runs to the house, you don't want that electricity to get cut off.
Right.
Okay. Because the issues that come up when you don't have electricity running to a property.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So you want to figure out what the cost is associated with it. You also want to figure out from a maintenance standpoint, put together a maintenance plan. If the house is in the neighborhood with an HOA, you
Right.
want to make sure that you comply with the rules and regulations of that HOA.
Right.
You want to make sure that trash can is in the garage if that's one of the requirements.
Right.
You want to make sure that yard stays cut at the length of the HOA says, hey, you need to maintain this property.
Right.
So that's important. Okay. But then in regards to as far as the next step, okay, when they come in and sit down, figure out what is it that you actually want to do with the property. Do you want to hold on to the property? Mm-hmm. Is it a situation where you plan on moving into this property? Mm-hmm. Maybe you think, hey, maybe I'll turn this into an investment property, and then maybe you can generate some revenue from it. Or you may decide ultimately, you know what, I don't want to have to continue to maintain this property because there's costs associated with it. I want to just go ahead and sell the property and be done with it.
Right. And that's when they would call someone like us, right?
Absolutely.
So oftentimes those calls come to us first, right? When I think the call should arguably going to the estate attorney, probate attorney first, right? Because they can kind of guide you through the process. My job is to help you like stabilize the home, right? So what I find is most people call us too late, right? The grass is already grown.
Right.
The taxes may not have been paid.
Sure.
You know, they don't know what's going on with the mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know how much the property's worth.
Right.
You know, if it's during the winter, the home hasn't been winterized.
Right.
You know, so
Yeah.
you got to think about it. Like
Very
these
important.
things are all vital to the value of the property that the person that you love has passed on to you. So you got to have a team around you to make sure that the asset is properly taken care of, so you can dispose of it for maximum value.
Absolutely.
Right? And then, we're sitting down and talking to the client. Do you want to put more money into the property so you can get max value, or do you want to sell it, as is and just wipe your hands free and clear? And I think oftentimes it's 50-50. 50% of the people are like, look, I live in Texas, or I live in, a state away.
Right.
I've got enough problems managing my own house. I just want to get the property off my hand. For some people, this is sentimental. I want to get as much money as I possibly can. And that's where getting together with a team and making sure that you understand the process puts you guys into a position to be able to win, right? So, next question. I got a lot of questions, all right? So, cost associated with probate.
Sure.
Right. So, let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So, in Virginia, one of the good things is back in the 90s they got rid of the estate tax. Okay. So that's nothing that we have to worry about here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. The death tax is what they used to call it. Mm-hmm. Okay. Dealing at a federal level, dealing with the IRS. Okay. 99% of Americans don't have to worry about the estate taxes. In December 2017, new tax bill went into law up in DC, and what ended up happening is the thresholds in dealing with the estate tax went up tremendously. For single individuals, it is now 11 point something $million that anything in excess of that you have to pay, or your loved ones would have to pay taxes on. Okay. From an estate standpoint. For married individuals, that number goes all the way up to 22 million and some change. Okay. So the bottom line is that for most Americans, when it comes to estate tax at the federal and at the state level, in Virginia, it's usually a non-issue. Okay. Where the issue comes in is at the local level when dealing with the probate process. Again, what they're going to do is they're going to take all of the assets that are part of your estate, total those up, give them the value that they deserve. Okay. And then from there, they're going to take a percentage. Okay. They're going to take a certain amount based on the total value of the property. So the more that you have as a part of your estate, the more expensive the probate process is going to be. The least amount, if you have less in your estate, then you're not going to have as much cost associated with probate. Okay. Now there are also some other costs associated with it. For example, if you are named the executor under a will, okay, and the will doesn't specifically say that you can serve as an executor without paying a bond. Okay. So basically, if you're serving as the executor in the will, you can say, hey, I don't want anybody to have to come out of pocket in order to be my executor. Okay. But if the will doesn't specifically state that, then the Code of Virginia actually requires that a bond be put up. So you usually will work with an insurance company to actually put up the majority of the money, but essentially you have to come out of pocket in order to qualify as the executor of that particular estate, or the administrator. The administrator is an individual who's serving in the capacity of wrapping up the affairs if there's no will in place.
Got it. And is that administrator court appointed, or is that something they could hire like someone like you to help? How does that work?
So the administrator is always court appointed. The executor is always court appointed, but the executor is the person or individual that you specifically denote in your will that you want to serve in that capacity.
Got it.
If you don't have a will, then Any family member can go down. It might be a neighbor who can actually serve in that capacity.
Right.
It could be a creditor who wants to get paid. Maybe it's a credit card company that you owe money to. They can actually qualify as administrator for your estate if you do not actually specifically name someone to have someone serve in that capacity.
So that's why it's so important for you guys to plan ahead. Right?
Absolutely.
A lot of these things are all way over my head, and I'm pretty tall, right? But just imagine, like, when you're going through the emotion of losing a family member,
Yep.
right? And you have kids, and you have a job, and you have a home, and you have a life, and you're having to unravel all these things that are very complicated. It's very important that even if you're going through these things, go hire a professional, right?
Absolutely.
There are going to be mistakes that you could potentially make. There are so many things that you got to learn. Like, he's been doing it for years. Pay the money, allow him to take you through the process. That way you got all your T's crossed, right? And all your I's dotted. Because the last thing that you want is, like I said before, something that your family's worked so hard for, right? It wasn't hard. It was hard for people to buy a home and to save a down payment. For us to make a mistake based off of a technicality, right? Instead of hiring a professional who's been through it. Yeah. So if I think it's one thing you guys get out of this video, make sure that you call. If you know anyone who's has a family member or inherited home, call a professional. Call Brian so he can help you out and he can walk you through the process. Right?
Absolutely.
Cool. All right, let's get to the next question. No, don't stop. Don't stop. How you like it?
That was good.
Flowing?
Yeah, that was good.
How you like it?
Pretty good.
Flowing? Want to get some water real quick?
I'm good.
All right, cool. Let's put this tape. Let's take this one up. You can tape on top of it. I have just tape right on top. All right, cool. Are we still on here?
Yep, still going.
Good. Okay, cool.
Ready to go.
Yep. Okay. Okay, so Brian, God forbid something happens, right? Life happens and
Sure.
a family member dies,
Sure.
right? What are 3 things that people should immediately do when a family member dies and there's an inherited property that's left to them?
Sure. So, family member passes away. Obviously, it's an emotional time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but it's one of those situations where you want to make sure you get on top of the situation as soon as you're in a position to be able to do so. So,
Okay.
3 things that I would recommend. Okay, the first thing I would recommend is to secure the property. Okay, I think one of the big things is that you hear the stories about family members going into the house and they start taking stuff out of the house before the will's been read or you've started the probate process.
Right.
Securing the property is important.
Okay.
The second thing I would recommend is put together a maintenance plan. Okay. And when I talk about a maintenance plan, I'm talking about for the property itself, making sure if there are HOA rules that those rules get followed. Regarding the landscaping, if it's a situation where there are rules that the HOA has, like for example with your trash can, it might need to be in the house or behind the back of the house.
Right.
Make sure you follow through with it as a part of your maintenance plan.
Okay.
And last but certainly not least, figure out what are the expenses associated with the home. Is there a mortgage still on the property?
Okay.
Is there money still owed? Figure out who the mortgage company is.
Right.
Okay. And then also the utilities associated with the house. Figure out what the expenses are. Make sure those utilities are maintained.
Got it.
You might have to come out of pocket initially because you may not have access to that individual's funds
Okay.
in their bank accounts before the probate process begins. Okay. But you want to make sure that those things stay on and none of that stuff gets cut off.
I got it. So I got a follow-up question to that.
Right.
Suppose there is a mortgage, suppose there are taxes, right? And you can't get access to the money that the loved one has left.
Sure.
How does that work out? Does the person get reimbursed after? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so if you are going through this process and you have to come out of pocket, you can be reimbursed. Okay, you definitely can be reimbursed from the estate of the individual who's passed away.
Okay.
Okay, well, family member, loved one, whoever it may be. Okay, you can be reimbursed if you can't get access to the funds that are in the account.
Okay. All right. What about debt? So suppose a person has credit card debt. Suppose a person has, other debt that's not maybe associated with a property.
Sure.
Right? How does that work out?
Sure. So the first thing you need to know is that as the loved one who may be inheriting property, you are not specifically liable for that person's debt. Okay. So you're not going to have to come out of your pocket to pay their credit card bills, anything that they might have, outstanding. Maybe they've got, store cards or whatnot. You are not personally responsible for those things. Okay. Now, if you are serving as the executor under a will, okay, or you've been declared the administrator under the probate process with the courts. Mm-hmm. If that is the case, then you are considered what they call a fiduciary.
Okay.
You have a responsibility to make sure that those debts get taken care of out of the assets that are in the estate.
Okay.
Now, if there aren't assets in the estate to take care of those things, well then, essentially, the estate is what they call insolvent. Okay. And so now those things are essentially going to have to be written off by those creditors.
Got you. Okay, cool. All right, cool. Good. That's good. I like this. All right. Down on top. Question. So we did, if I inherit a home, what should I do? Can I sell a home? What's the probate process in Virginia?
Yep.
Okay. All right, Brian. So what is the probate process in Virginia?
Okay. So probate, first of all, is the process that loved ones, friends go through in order to wrap up an individual's affairs after they pass away.
Okay.
That involves the court being involved.
Okay.
The circuit court in your local jurisdiction, wherever the person resided at when they passed away, is where they would ultimately go through that probate process.
Okay.
And so that involves making sure that if there are taxes owed, that those things get paid. If there are creditors that are owed, that those things get taken care of. Mm-hmm. And then whatever assets they have get distributed to whoever they're supposed to go to.
Okay.
And so, they're working closely with the courts. They're also working closely with an individual known as the Commissioner of Accounts,
right,
which is basically an extension of the court. It's usually an attorney, and they are the ones that will make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to do as far as wrapping up the affairs of that individual.
Okay, got it. So, what if someone doesn't live in the state of Virginia,
sure,
right? Which I'm sure happens often, right?
Absolutely.
But something's going on. Do they have to be here to be able to execute all the things that they need to execute as far as probate?
Sure. So they don't necessarily have to live in the Commonwealth of Virginia in order to serve in the capacity of an executor or as the administrator, okay?
Right.
But they do have to have what's called a resident agent, okay? Someone who is actually in the state who will get service, and essentially they will be able to get the documents from the court, okay? So you don't have to be a resident of Virginia, but you do need to have a resident agent that can serve in that capacity. And oftentimes they'll come to attorneys like myself to serve in that capacity as the resident agent for you during the probate process.
Okay, cool. So how long does the probate process take?
Probate process can be very short. It can be a matter of months. Okay, and usually when we're talking months, we're talking about in the range of about 6 months or so. Or it can drag out. It can be an extended process if you've got people at odds, or there's a situation that's going on. Maybe the person was involved in some type of litigation when they passed away, and the court case lasts a long time before you can wrap up that person's affairs or whatnot. So it may be years before that probate process ultimately ends up wrapping up.
Okay, so that's probably why it's important for them to hire a professional, right?
Sure.
Because you want to be on more of the side of short than long. Because if it's long expenses, houses need maintenance, it costs the estate more.
Sure. The
longer the process goes on.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. One thing to take in consideration, however, if you have an estate that is more modest, and let's say the estate is valued at less than $50,000.
Okay.
If that is the case, there's something here in Virginia known as the Virginia Small Estate Affidavit. Okay. Okay, and what the small estate affidavit is a document that is notarized. Okay, and it's filled out by the folks who are the heirs, and they sign off on it, and they basically say, hey, I'm appointing someone who's in a position to be able to go collect whatever assets that there may be hanging out there. Maybe maybe there's bank accounts, and maybe there's money in bank accounts. It might be a situation where we're talking about a vehicle and being able to go to the DMV and get possession of that particular item. So you can do a small estate affidavit, and that saves you having to actually go through the probate process.
Gotcha.
Okay, but you have to wait 60 days. Virginia law requires you to wait 60 days after the date of death of the individual before you can actually utilize a small estate affidavit.
Okay, cool. Last follow-up question on this. What is one thing that people generally get surprised about when they go through the probate process?
I think a lot of times they just don't realize how complex the situation can be. There are a lot of rules that kind of are a part of this process, and I think they can be shocked just by the amount of rules and what you have to go through in order to actually do it and do it effectively.
Right.
Okay. So I think that's probably the thing that probably stuns most people is just the amount of rules and how intensive this process can be.
Right. It's a lot of things going on, a lot
Absolutely.
of moving parts. You got a lot of life going on, and you're dealing with law, right?
Yeah.
And he goes to law school for a reason, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Cool. All right. This one is
Can you get some tape?
yes. Can you get some tape, brother?
Thank you.
This one is
The family members at odds about selling the property.
this one we come to.
Yeah.
All right, coach. All right, so hypothetically, family members, one person in the family wants to sell a house, other people in the family don't want to sell a house. House is in probate, it's inherited. What happens?
So it can turn ugly very quickly. Family members at odds. The number one suggestion I have when you have family members who may be at odds about a situation like this is to try to work it out amongst family members.
Okay.
I mean, your family, if it's a situation where you can actually come to some type of agreement as to what's going to happen with this property, first of all, realize and understand that you're going to have to make compromises if everybody's not on the same page.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, working it out is my number one suggestion. Okay. Because if you can't work it out, then the second thing that ultimately ends up happening a lot of times is you have to go to court and it has to be litigated.
Gotcha.
Okay. And so if you've got family members who want to sell and then others who don't, okay, the family members that do want to sell can do what's called a partition suit. Okay, they can file basically a lawsuit in their local jurisdiction where the property is located at, and essentially the court will decide what's going to happen with the property. They can either force the property to be split up, okay, like if it's land and people can get certain portions of it and they get theirs and then they can do whatever they want to with it and it gets divided. Or if it's a piece of property that has a house on it and you can't divide the house, then they can essentially force the sale of the house, and then whatever the proceeds are can be divided amongst the family members who are supposed to inherit.
I got you. So family members that are going through this right now, people who, I'm sure there's some people out there that are going through there right now. What are a couple of tips, a couple of just, ninja tips that you would say, look, these are things that I would recommend that you guys do. You're already in it. I understand you already got the conflict. What are some things that they can kind of work through?
Sure. So if you're going through the situation right now, you need to go ahead and sit down with someone and try to figure out what's the best course of action. Oftentimes when you've got family members who are at odds, going out and actually enlisting the services of an attorney, is an awesome thing to do because you've got a third party who's disinterested, who oftentimes can, maybe, bring logic to the situation.
Right.
And in those circumstances, now you're in a position to be able to work it out.
Right. So why don't you give me a horror story? I'm sure you've seen some, but I just want people to know, like, worst case scenarios, like, I've seen people, people have come to us, they want to sell homes, and it's been years till they could get control of the property to sell it. Just kind of tell some people like worst case scenarios, what could happen if they don't hire a professional, get these things worked out.
Sure. So one situation that comes to mind, there was a family property, was inherited by a couple of siblings and an aunt. Grandfather had passed away, and what ended up happening was they ended up going at it. I mean, when I say going at it, there were criminal allegations that were, talked about. Police had to investigate, break-ins at houses, and one person thought that their internet was being hacked into, and they were trying to post stuff on social media. I mean, it got really, really, really bad very, very quickly because they weren't on the same page.
Right.
And it did. It took a considerable amount of time. Eventually, what ended up happening was the court ultimately ended up having to decide what took place. Now, the reality is that probably could have happened much sooner, but because of the angst and the animosity amongst the people, it was more tit for tat, and you want to avoid those situations if you can.
Right. Totally understand. Cool. Good there. All right. So I think, so what do I do if I inherit a home? We did that one, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. We did. What should I do? What should I do with a family member's home when they die? Did we do that one? What should I do with a family member's home when they die?
Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Can I sell an inherited home in Virginia? Did we do that one?
Yes.
Okay. What's the probate process in Virginia? Yeah. What happens if some family members do and don't? And who's responsible for paying the cost of an inherited home? We did that one as well, right?
Did we talk about that?
The cost of inherited home?
Let's do it.
I don't think we did.
Let's just do that real quick.
Yeah, I don't think we did. Yeah.
All right. So, Brian, what are the costs associated with an inherited home?
So when it comes to an inherited piece of property, just like any piece of property, there's more than likely going to be a mortgage on the property. Okay, outstanding. If it is paid off, then obviously you don't have to worry about that. But there are maintenance costs associated with the property as well. Okay, so whether that be the landscaping, it could be HOA fees, it could be utilities. Okay, all of those things are associated. The taxes, that's a big part of it. In Virginia, we're looking at twice a year where we're looking at taxes being levied on the property. So, so those are typically the costs associated with an inherited property.
Got it. And those costs are on the person that the property's inherited to, or is those costs on the estate?
Sure. So initially those costs are on the estate, until that property ends up legally passing to someone else. In Virginia, if a property is in someone's name, and they've got heirs, let's say mom, dad died, you've got 2 children, as a matter of law, when those individuals pass away, when the last surviving spouse passes away, a parent passes away, then as a matter of law, that property automatically goes to the immediate heirs, which in this situation we're talking about would be the children. Right. Now there's a process, and I won't get into the details of all the process that has to go into it, but the bottom line is it immediately passes to those individuals. So those individuals would now be responsible for the cost associated with that property.
Got you.
But if it doesn't immediately go to an heir or family member, then whoever is going to be the executor or the administrator for probate purposes, that will be the person responsible for making sure that those payments, the costs associated with, get made.
Okay, got it. Good. All right. So next question I'm going to ask you is going in. I want to make sure this is still on.
Okay.
Yeah. Quick booking. Next question I want to ask you is, what do you look for in a real estate agent when you have an inherited home to help you, get it ready for sale and all those types of stuff? Okay. All right. So Brian, you dealt with many people who have, inherited homes. What should they look for in a real estate agent or a real estate team who's going to, help them, dispose of the property? What are the things that you look for? What are the things that the family should look for?
Sure. So I think whenever you inherit a piece of property, that's different than if you just go out and, find a house in a neighborhood and you're looking to buy or you're trying to sell a house. Okay.
Right.
there's certain things, there's certain issues that come up with inherited property. So, trying to find someone that's experienced, someone that actually has done it before, I think is a personal preference of mine. I think. But then I think, honestly, the biggest thing is just trying to find somebody that you can relate to. Okay. Just because, somebody recommends somebody, you need to sit down and have a conversation with them. And if you ultimately decide that this is the right person to work with me, they've got the requisite experience, then that's who you ultimately go with.
Right.
But if you sit down and maybe you don't get the warm and fuzzies when you sit down with that individual, then maybe you should look to work with someone else. But my biggest thing is to figure out someone that you can work well with,
right.
Okay, but then someone that also has the experience, that has dealt with situations where properties have been inherited.
Right, and I think the things that, I think you hit the nail on the head. Any agent can open a door, right?
Right.
Not many agents can handle a very complex real estate transaction, which this is, right? So not only are you helping someone sell a property, oftentimes the property isn't in sell-ready condition.
Right.
So you got to make sure that you're a good steward and you have experience to get the home ready for the market. You have to stabilize the property, right? So we oftentimes have to call our maintenance people out to make sure that, pipes get winterized, grass gets cut, make sure there are no roof leaks, make sure that the home's secured, disposing of things that the family members don't want. We have to oftentimes hire contractors to get them in there as well. I mean, there's a litany of things that are associated with getting a property ready for the market, right?
Absolutely.
And not on top, and I haven't gotten to value, like figuring out what the value of the home is. So when you sit down with us at the AJ team, we're experienced when it comes to probate homes, but we're also experienced in working with professionals, right? So I think the number one thing is make sure you have a team, make sure you have someone that has a team, so they can help you through an already difficult process. Is somebody knocking the door?
No, I don't think so. Sound like it was like.
All right, cool. I think we're rolling good. So last one I want to do, professional athletes.
Okay. All right.
And we'll kind of impromptu that as well.
Okay. That's fine. I took a sip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Brian on the stand, he be talking forever. He don't even take no sip, no pee, no nothing.
Got to roll with it.
You got to. If you know it, you know it, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
All right, so we're here with Brian Smalls, Cornerstone Estate Planning. So we work with a lot of professional athletes, right? And you come from an athletic background.
Sure.
Played at University of Michigan.
Sure.
Oftentimes I see a lot of our professional athletes are really worried about making the money, which is all good. Mm-hmm. But I oftentimes tell them it's about the preservation of your money. Absolutely. As well. So you got your financial advisor, right? You got your accountant, right? You've got maybe your business manager. You've got your real estate professional, right?
Sure.
But tell me why the estate planner is vital to making sure that what you work so hard for gets to the people that you love the most.
Sure. So I think the biggest thing, whenever you talk about professional athletes, normally you're talking considerable resources, considerable assets, okay? But as quickly as those things come, if they're not protected, if there's not a good plan in place, those things can go even quicker.
Got you.
Okay. And so the bottom line is that what you want to do if you're dealing with someone or you have considerable assets yourself, you want to make sure that there's a plan in place to make sure that you're not the only one that gets to experience, the fruits of your labor. Right. That for generations to come, you're establishing a legacy for those family members who may never even, meet you at any point in time. Okay. But the bottom line is that by putting a plan into place, you can preserve those assets and be able to live over those assets well after you finish your playing career.
Right.
Okay. But then after you've passed away and you've transitioned, now your family is going to be in a position to be able to, reap the benefits of your hard work.
Yeah, I think it was a very difficult conversation when we sat down and just talking about my debt. Right.
Right.
I think that's something that's a big transition that people, especially younger people, have to make. But It's a very important conversation, right?
Absolutely.
So when you're sitting down with a professional athlete, give me a couple of questions that they need to be prepared to answer.
Right. So one of the things that when you're sitting down with someone who's a professional athlete, they need to figure out exactly, okay, what's my goal? What's my game plan after I get done playing ball? Okay. Because a lot of times, we're in the here and now, we're thinking about what's going on currently, okay? But what's the game plan? How do you want to live? What's the quality of life that you want to live, okay? Do you want to have it be a situation where you spend up everything that you've got, while you're here on this earth and don't leave anything to anybody? Right. Or do you want to set your family up so that, hopefully in the future they won't have to work as hard, or they can take advantage of the hard work that you've actually had while you were here. Okay? So that's very, very important. So from that standpoint, you want to make sure that you put a plan in place and give some thought as to kind of what you want to look forward to in the future.
Got it. So when we sit down, it's very important for you to talk to my financial advisor, right? To make
Absolutely.
sure that you've got a clear understanding of what my financial assets are. It's very important for you to talk to my real estate agent so you understand like what type of assets and values that we put on that. Are there any other members of the team that you need to make sure that that you have communication with to put an effective estate plan together?
Sure. So you definitely want to have a conversation with the CPA.
Right.
Okay. You want to make sure that accountant is in the loop. The financial planner, you definitely want to make sure that they're in the loop as well. If there are real estate members of the team, you want to make sure that everybody's on the same page in regards to that as well.
Right.
Okay. But one of the things that you also want to take into consideration when it comes to estate planning, okay, it's not just about assets, okay? It's about what happens to me, or if something happens to me, what happens to my children, okay?
Mm-hmm.
If you have children under the age of 18, you want to make sure that you name a guardian for those children, okay? You want to also make sure that, you put things into place to make sure that they are taken care of.
Got it.
Okay. So that's very, very important. Or let's say something happens and I'm injured, in an accident, whether it be off the field or maybe even on the field, and maybe I become incapacitated. Who's in a position to be able to take care of my financial affairs if something were to happen? So making sure that a power of attorney is in place.
Right.
Or let's say, God forbid, something were to happen and you were to be incapacitated and someone need to make medical decisions on your behalf as well. That is a part of the estate planning process. So that's something that needs to be taken into consideration. It's not just about the assets, whether they're considerable or not, but it's also about making sure that someone can speak on your behalf in the event that something were to happen and you can't speak for yourself.
Right. So athletes are from all over the country.
Absolutely.
They can literally do a virtual call with you, kind of run down things. This doesn't have to be something that's done in person, but it does need to be something that's done like with urgency, right? We just never know when life's going to happen. We never know when situations are going to change. And the quicker you have these conversations, you get it set up, then you don't have to have the conversations anymore. Now you're just in checkup mode once a year, checking in with Brian, making sure that everything's aligned with what your plans are. I tell my friends, not just athletes, but people, my friends, you work really, really hard for this. Like we all work hard, not just for us, but for our kids,
right? For
our families. Let's make sure that we do the things that we need to do to make sure that those things get passed on properly, right?
Yeah, and no, that's very, very important. And then also when you talk about people being from all over the country, you may have assets all over the country, okay, and that's something to take into consideration. You may live in the Washington D.C. area or Northern Virginia area, okay, but you may be from South Florida or you may be from California, and if that's the case and you own property in those places, if you were to pass away and those things weren't, let's say, in a trust, okay, now what ends up happening is your family members are going to have to go through the probate process, not only here where you live locally,
right,
but then in that jurisdiction where you own property out of state as well.
Right.
So doing some estate planning where you set up a trust and you take those assets and you place those things into a trust or get them deeded in some fashion that they pass on, however you ultimately end up deciding to do it.
Right.
However you do it, do the planning in advance so that you can minimize the costs associated with that transition period after you've passed away. But then you also want to make sure that you reduce the stress, because anytime someone passes away, it's an emotional situation. Reducing that stress is very, very important.
Yeah, oftentimes what I find is not the situation that cripples us financially, right? It's how we react.
Absolutely.
Or our lack of preparation when it comes that cripples people, right? And if you can just, you're gonna go through it anyway, right?
Absolutely.
You might as well be financially prepared, right? You know, from a situation where, or legally prepared, so that things are aligned exactly where you want them to be, right? Cool. So, Brian, I appreciate you, man.
Appreciate being here.
All right. I think we crushed it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
Nuked that
Yeah.
joint, yo. Dang. That was a very natural conversation.
Mm-hmm. And that's what you want, you know.